Crazy to get it all around.
November 28th, 2023 Board of Education meeting. We are calling the meeting to order and it is 7:02 p.m. And if everyone could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. A reading of meeting notice. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of the public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provision of the Act, the Verona Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting, published in the Star Ledger, posted with the Township of Verona and the Verona Education Association. Posting of this meeting, setting forth the time, location, and agenda were posted at the Verona Board of Education office and on the Verona Public Schools District website. Copies of tonight's agenda and resolutions have been made available to the public via the Board of Education website. Mr. Cruz, if you could please call attendance.
Sure, Mr. Walker.
I am here.
Mrs. Frizella, Mrs. Farrar,
Here.
Mrs. Prisco,
Here.
Mrs. Freshy.
Here.
We have quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our agenda, we are going to start with our superintendent report with Ms. Diane DiGiuseppe.
In a moment, I'm going to show you an excerpt of some of the good work that's happening in the district with regard to professional development. But just a couple of things I'd like to update you on. It's that time of the year when safety and security plans and the statement of assurance that we have our safety and security plans ready to go is upon us, and we filed our what's called an SOA, or statement of assurance, with the county office that our safety and security plans have been updated for this year. And I can tell you that it was a lot easier this year. The work that the principals did last year really helped them out, just really updating and making small tweaks, and obviously changing the class lists and staff lists, et cetera. The New Jersey Department of Education school performance reports narratives have also been completed and filed with the Department of Ed. We also, in November, generally work on the memorandum of agreement between the district and law enforcement. But this year the state is revising it, so it has not been released yet. So we're still working under last year's memorandum of agreement. As soon as the state releases that, Chief Kieran and I will sit and go over the changes, discuss anything that we need to discuss, sign the document. From there, it goes on to the county prosecutor's office and then the executive county superintendent for signatures. At that point, we can put it on the board agenda for approval. The QSAC committee had a follow-up meeting, and we should be complete with our district performance review ahead of the December 12th board meeting. So we can get it to you for approval and then get it to the state by December 15th. Except for instruction and program, which we have to wait for the Department of Education to provide us with our scores. So we can't even estimate where we are in that particular element. We should be scoring at or above 80% in all of our categories and 100% in most of them. So that's good news. Congratulations to VHS ladies volleyball coach Ryan Brown, who was named Coach of the Year by the Super Essex Conference. Well deserved, I will say. And please spread the word about our digital safety and mindfulness program that's taking place on December 13th. in the VHS auditorium from 7 to 8:30. We're excited to already see 50 people have registered to attend. For those people that can't attend, it will be live streamed. We cannot record it because the contract prohibits us from recording it. But we will be live streaming it. So if people can't come, it'll be available through our YouTube channel. And Governor Murphy signed a law yesterday that really will help with the teacher shortage in 3 to 4 years. It changes the praxis structure for what's called the pre-praxis. So that's a good thing for trying to alleviate the stress on school districts in finding staff. And just one more Department of Ed item. Dr. Angelica Allen McMillan announced her retirement in January, so she'll be stepping down and her retirement. Okay, let's go to the screen. We're going to share screen. So during grade level meetings this week, and Julie DiGiacomo, who's here as a leave replacement for Julia Peter, who was our humanities supervisor, did some work with kindergarten for independent reading. She also put together a program with with Mrs. Studo and Dr. Lanzo for 3rd grade and 4th grade. I'm just going to show you a piece of 4th grade. So what they're looking at here for 3rd and 4th grade, I'm sorry, in math, grades 1 and 2 worked with Mrs. Gisario, our math coach, on mental math strategies for addition and subtraction. So really trying to maximize grade level meeting time, department meeting time, and faculty meeting time. So what they looked at patterns to identify areas of strength and weakness. And the way we do that, we look at, there's something called a district evidence statement analysis, and they show us where we are above the state, at the state average, and below the state average. And I know Dr. Miller last week talked about we don't want to be at or below the state average. So this is what an evidence statement looks like. And what you can see is there are green dots and there are blue squares. The green dots are how our students performed. And if you were to take directly below that dot, there is a standard. So that's the standard that question relates to. So anywhere we are close to or below the dot, they spend some time going through that program. So in addition to that, it will tell us, like, for instance, that first number 2, where we're a fairly significantly below, is reading informational text. So if we go to that on the next page, which I don't have on the presentation, it will tell us what the evidence statement is, what the course state standard is, and what type of item it is. So whether or not it's a short constructed response, is it a technology enhanced? Do kids have to drag and drop? Did they have multiple answers for a multiple choice where they had to choose all that apply? And then you can go to the state's released items and see examples. So they went over strengths. They went over 2 years of these items. And then I'm just going to quickly go through this because this is not what I wanted to show you. Where it really hit home for our teachers is, I'm sorry, this is going so slow. I'm trying to advance it as quickly as I can. Where she went to and showed the teachers what the questions look like. And I thought it's important for the board. Oh. But I sent you the wrong one. So anyway, what she showed them was what the questions actually look like. So when I went through the presentation, there was a question about peanuts. And it was about, the article that I read was about George Washington Carver. And the question that I saw the kids had to answer was about the nitrogen cycle. And I'm thinking, I read the passage. I didn't see anything about the nitrogen cycle in there. And if you don't look at the screen clearly enough, I found it, didn't take long. There's a second tab. There's a second article, second passage. So our kids have to navigate between, and Reese knows this because she's taken these tests, but that was actually a third grade question, between two passages, a series of multiple choice questions, a series of short answer questions, a drag and drop to support the evidence of, whatever claim they were given. Sometimes they have to make a claim. And it's very eye-opening when you look at what our kids have to navigate in order to perform. And I think, and I'm sure they've done this before in Verona. I'm not saying this is the first time we've ever done an exercise like this. But to link what we're doing with regard to professional development and looking at the standards, what we started earlier in the year, and looking and saying, okay, well, this is the standard. Let's unpack that. What does that standard ask kids to know and be able to do? Okay, well, we've unpacked the standard. Where is the cognitive level of that standard? So is it recall? Is it analysis? Is it comprehension? Is it really high level critical thinking where we're asking for them to utilize knowledge? And if we are not identifying those cognitive levels of the standards, are we instructing it at the right level? Are we assessing it at the right level? So all of these activities that that's happening among the administrators that are working hard to move kids is incremental, but cumulative. We should see hopefully a big jump for next year, because it tells us there's a pattern of our early literacy. We don't do enough informational text. It's an easy fix. Maybe the informational text is after the test. We need to maybe we need to move the curriculum around. So exercises like this really focus for teachers. Oh, that's an easy fix. We do that in May. The test is in April. If that's clearly a heavy tested item, maybe we should put that earlier in the year. These are decisions that we will continue to look at where we are not meeting what Verona standards are, and addressing that early and enough time. And again, is this state test the end all and be all? No, right? It's 3 days in the life of a student, but it's the only measure we have in which to compare how well we do with the districts that we associate ourselves with. And it allows, and the standards are high level. They're much higher level than they were 10 years ago. So we know if we're teaching the standards at the cognitive level that they are designed, we're pushing kids to a high cognitive level. So sorry, I didn't have the right presentation. I will send it to you if you want to take a peek at it. It's really very eye-opening. And actually what I should send you is the website where you can see the questions and just peruse the types of questions that our kids have to answer in third grade. In third grade, it's a literacy question that they have to identify what the arrows in the nitrogen cycle, which clearly for me is a science question, based on two passages, and find common themes between the two passages. It really is, it's eye-opening what our kids are being asked to do. And then if you really want to freak yourself out a little, go to the math section. Yes, thank you, Mr. Viducci. So that's my report for this evening. And
I have one
Thank
question.
you.
So
sure.
is the not getting the IMP score yet, is that a Verona specific or a Essex County specific? Because I got that about 4 weeks ago. And what I thought was interesting was that student attendance rate counted for 1/6 of the IMP score this year,
It does.
which is crazy.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. But how come Essex County Verona hasn't got them yet?
We haven't had our CUSAC training yet either. It's December 6th. I did email the county office today and say, can we get our IMP scores? Because we'd like to be able to finish up our district performance review.
Interesting. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So Essex County probably.
That was great. Thank you so much. I love seeing that evidence report. I think also
again, just leaning in or using the standardized test just in general helps to support instructional gaps.
Yes,
Because it
absolutely.
tells us, you know, as educators, where we can provide better instruction. Last week, I brought this up in a little bit of a different context, but I think maybe we can look at what books we have, what nonfiction books we have, because oftentimes classroom libraries are filled with fiction books, which are wonderful, but not having good access to the nonfiction is tough. And then oftentimes, I don't know if teachers are using like ReadWorks or Epic or things like that, and they're not the authentic books. So maybe
News LA, we can.
News Alice,
News
yeah, yeah, and even just like for guided
Yeah.
reading, just to see if we have those and if we have places in the budget to make sure that we're.
Well, I think what Mrs. DiGiacomo is doing now is going around to different classrooms and looking at book baskets and seeing what we need and what we can provide. And, you know, she's, the nice thing about having that knowledge here is that her background is literacy coaching and reading specialist. So she really can step in where Mrs. Peter, you know, in her absence, and we won't lose a beat in ELA. And yeah, so that's good. And we are looking at all of those things. It tells us a lot about just what we're expecting of our kids, what we're expecting of ourselves, what materials and resources, as you said, that we may need. And it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our business administrators report, Mr. Jorge Cruz.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. In finance, this month we have our October board secretary and treasurers and transfer reports. They're all in agreement. One of the updates for this month is our auditors, Nisavacha, will be joining our next board meeting, and they will be presenting the 2022-23 audit report. At this meeting, the board will have the opportunity to engage with Mr. Raymond Saronelli Jr. and ask any follow-ups on findings and the fiscal health of our district. We're officially in budget season, and our school administrators are now in the process of reviewing, submitting their 2024-25 budget build, their request for the next school year. And in this process, Mrs. DiGiuseppe and myself will be reviewing their submissions in the month of January, before the preliminary budget presentation is presented to the board in February. Right after that preliminary presentation in the month of March, it's when we will have our vote to adopt the budget before it gets submitted to the county for approval. This concludes my report for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. Does anyone have any questions? No, thank you. Moving on, we have our student representative report by Ms. Reese Shahado. Thank you, Reese.
Cool. So, quick one for me. Student Council has begun its annual toy drive. Donations will go to Hawkins Elementary School in Newark. Donation bins are located in the front lobby of VHS, asking that gifts are wrapped and labeled with and deposited in the appropriate level for grade and gender, whether male, female, unisex. Lanyards and photo IDs have been rolled out for students and staff at VHS. District provided each student with both and will be requiring them to be worn for identification and security purposes. There was a little like initial like, oh, extra thing from students, but I think it's like smoothed over pretty well. And that's it from me.
Thank you.
Just a real quick question. Are the lanyards and ID, is that only for the high school or is that for the middle school as well?
I'm not sure the middle school has theirs yet,
Oh, okay, but
Yeah.
it will be for, all.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
and we'll get those pictures taken earlier next year.
Moving on to our committee reports, we just have finance. And Mr. Cruz really summed up the entire finance committee meeting. I think the only other thing that we very briefly discussed is that we're continuing that telecommunication and data review to continue to see where we can combine or save with any extra lines and things like that. So, but that was really it, right? Yeah. Thank you. Moving on to public comments on agenda action items. So if anyone has a comment on anything we are voting on this evening, please come to the podium and state your name, and you have 3 minutes. Seeing none, we will move on to discussion items. I just for myself, since I wasn't at our last meeting, I'm sorry about that, but I just wanted to congratulate Mr. Mike Boone, our new board member in January. So thank you, congratulations, and thank you for putting yourself out there to both you and Mr. Ferry on running a campaign. And also, I wanted to also compliment and congratulate our volleyball team. Going to the game out in Franklin for their Group 1 championship was really, those girls are amazing. So congratulations to all those girls. And Mr. Giuseppe, thank you for also setting up this digital safety and cyberbullying event on December 13th. I'm glad that 50 people have RSVP'd, and hopefully we'll have a really big attendance for that. And also I wanted to, our spotlight players, our students, the performance of A Murder Announced. I'm so glad I was able to get there. It was really, I just have such amazing talent, like throughout everything, our band, our everything. Just crazy the talent that comes out of
The fact that they
here.
did that entire
I know.
show with
Accents.
accents, it's amazing.
They just
Amazing.
were the set, everything was just unbelievable. So congratulations to all our students, everyone. It was just nice to report good things. So anyone else have discussion?
I just want to thank or compliment. I'm grateful to see that these lanyards, they're a small thing, but when we think about safety and small steps that we can take to ensure safety, having and it takes time for everyone to get used to having these lanyards, but when everyone has it and we know that this is a marking or a marker, I should say, for a person who is supposed to be in the building, it makes our building so much safer. So thank you. This is one small step to more secure buildings.
It's nice to have you back at the helm, board president, commissioner.
Commissioner.
And
Friska.
Commissioner Ferreira did an excellent job in your departure.
For discussion, I just wanted to thank Mrs. Thomas and Mrs. Barone. So our life skills class is up and running. And I was really honored and privileged. They asked me to go speak. So I was at the high school the day before Thanksgiving, and it was a talk about in the job world, how the importance of organizations, soft skills, organization, communication, teamwork. And it was just really nice to be able to speak to the kids, to engage. They had awesome questions. And they did ask me to go back, and I'm going to talk to the 8th graders next Friday. So yeah, so I'm just happy to see the life skills up and going, and they have really good topics, and the kids are really engaged in it. So yeah.
And they were very engaged with when talking a little bit about her work with the Thanksgiving Day Macy's parade balloons. They were really engaged.
Yeah, I did it in the context of the organization of having 4,000 people to pull that parade off, and how the communication, just all the topics she gave me before. And I worked with her beforehand, because she put together a slideshow for the kids with certain vocabulary, definitions on it, and what the importance of those soft skills are and how they're transferable into any walk of life. So it's just really fun to be part of that. So I'm very thankful for that.
And just wanted to say that, like, I've seen like the rollout of like greater visibility and information about like HIB stuff, like in the Friday folders, QR codes like that are incredibly visible and accessible around the school. And yeah, I just appreciate seeing those guys up.
Mhm. Great.
QR code to report an HIB, is that an anonymous?
It can be anonymous.
It can be.
It does ask your name. Don't keep your name.
That's great.
Goes right into history.
Awesome.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
a lot
Yeah,
of positive
good things.
changes.
Thank you, Mr. Cogdill.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any discussion items they would like to mention? No? Okay. I need let's see. Oh, where are we? So we are going to move on to our resolutions. I need a motion to approve routine matters, resolutions A1.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Freshy, seconded by Mrs. Rosella. Any discussion? Mr. Cruz, if you could please call a roll.
Sure. Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Frizella?
Yes.
Mrs. Ferrara?
Yes.
Mrs. Prisco?
Yes.
Mrs. Freshy?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our personnel resolutions, I need a motion to please approve resolutions B1 to B3.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Freshy, seconded by
Second.
Mrs. Ferrara. Any discussion?
I just have a quick question about B32. I saw that the resignation was originally on the 22nd and now it's on the 30th. Aren't we like not in session that week? That just.
Oh, B32, okay. Yeah, my printed agenda says something different. So 60 days from the date of her resignation is December 30th. Because we're really not in session at all that week. Yeah, that's a Saturday though, you're right.
No, and I was just thinking that week we're not in session.
We're not in session, but she would be paid for that week.
Thank you. Mr. Cruz, if you could please call roll.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Frizella?
Yes.
Mrs. Ferrara? Mrs. Prisco?
Yes.
Mrs. Freshy?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. Moving on to our education resolutions, I need a motion, please, to approve resolutions C1 through C6.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Rosella, seconded by a second, Mrs. Pereira. Are there any discussions? Mr. Cruz, if you could call roll.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Frizella?
Yes.
Mrs. Farrar?
Yes.
Mrs. Prisco?
Yes.
Mrs. Freshy?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to athletics and co-curricular, I need a motion to approve resolutions D1 through D4.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Freshy, seconded by
Second.
Mrs. Rosella. Any questions or discussions?
Yeah, I have a quick question on D4 regarding the co-curricular stipends.
Mhm.
I think we've discussed this before, and I'm not sure if I understood an answer. How are the stipends paid out, and are they like once a year, or are they after each session?
It's
And-
different at the high school, right, Mr. Cruz?
So at the high school is that twice a year. So we do have half their stipend is paid out at the end of December, and the second half is paid in-
January to June?
Correct. January and June at the end of the school year.
And
That's
you'll
the
be happy to know that one of Mrs. Ackerman's professional development goals is to look at different data pieces that will inform her position. But in that, she came across a series of webinars about Genesis and found that we can do clubs and write in Genesis. So we don't need a separate sign-in sheet. We can keep track of the number of meetings and the students that are attending
That's because I was.
right in
gonna-
Genesis.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I was gonna ask that as a
Yes.
follow-up. Perfect.
Yeah.
And I just noticed that a couple of them are highlighted different.
Let me
The
look at this.
yellow is that.
Let me just open it to make sure I'm looking at the same thing you are. Because she doesn't print out the attachments for me. I have to open them. Oh, so if it's highlighted in yellow, so we approved everyone else already. So this
Okay.
is just to make sure there's only one list for payroll to look at. So anything that's highlighted is newly added to that list. So if it's not highlighted, you approved it on an earlier agenda. So we're approving Mr. Flood, who just started with us for state choir auditions and the jazz choir and Triam.
I just have a quick question. The Chef's Club at HB, what was that?
You know what? I don't know because it hasn't been in effect for years. I think since
okay.
before COVID. But we do know that National History Day is a tremendous amount of effort that the teachers
Yeah.
do for
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
They finished teaching that cycle course early in the year. And the National History Day competition is in January. And they work with those kids straight through the year, get them there. They go to the Saturday meeting. So it's a good use of a change in stipend.
Thank you. Mr. Cruz, if you could please call roll.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mrs. Rosella,
Yes.
Mrs. Ferrara,
Yes.
Mrs. Prisco,
Yes.
Mrs. Freshy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to our facilities, I need a motion, please, to approve resolutions E1 through E2.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Ferrera, seconded by Mrs. Freshy. Are there any discussions? Mr. Cruz, if you could please call roll.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mrs. Rosella,
Yes.
Mrs. Ferrara,
Yes.
Mrs. Prisco,
Yes.
Mrs. Freshy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to our finance resolutions, I need a motion to approve resolutions F1 through F5.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Freshy, seconded by
I'll second.
Mrs. Rosella. Are there any discussions?
Just a thank you to Vifi for
Yeah,
the
I was just
for the
gonna say.
grant. Yep,
Mhm.
that's great. It's a $2,250 grant for I'm just a kid with an IEP presentation. So that's
Yeah, that's the HBW Author Day
yeah,
presentation this year.
Jordan Toma.
Yeah.
Great.
Mr. Cruz, if you could please call roll.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mrs. Rosella,
Yes.
Mrs. Ferrara,
Yes.
Mrs. Prisco,
Yes.
Mrs. Freshy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to governance and policy, I need a motion to approve resolutions G1 through G2.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Freshy, seconded by
I'll second.
Mrs. Ferrara. Are there any discussions? Mr. Cruz, if you could please call roll.
Mr. Walker,
Jorge, I'm going to abstain from G1 and then yes to the other one.
Mrs. Rosella,
Yes.
Mrs. Ferrara,
Yes.
Mrs. Prisco,
Yes.
Mrs. Freshy.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our agenda for public comment. If there's anyone from the public that would like to comment on any item, please state your name and you have 3 minutes. Seeing none? Right, well, that's fairly quick. Okay. Let's see, our next Board of Ed meeting is December 12th, right?
And we will need a confidential session, I think.
Okay, our next scheduled public meeting will be held on December 12th, 2023, which will be Mrs. Freshy's last meeting. Sorry, beginning with confidential session at 6 p.m. and a public session at 7 p.m. in the Verona High School Learning Commons. I need a motion, please, to adjourn the meeting.
So moved. to
Motion by
adjourn.
Mrs. Freshy, seconded by
I'll second.
Mrs. Ferrara. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Our meeting is adjourned and it is 7:35. Thank you.